The most feared gangsters of all time. Some of these people are cruel murderers, and some of these people are masterminds behind thousands of organized crimes. All these people have one thing in common: hate and revenge in their hearts and violence in their history. We're telling you about some of the most feared gangsters of all time. Before we begin, make sure you like the video and hit the subscribe button. Let's begin. Frank Costello. Frank Costello's earlier name was Francesco Castaglia. Born on January 26, 1891, he was an Italian-American crime boss. He survived an assassination attempt in 1957. It was by Vincent Gigante. Costello belonged to the Luciano crime family. This persuaded him to give up his power and retire. Instead, he gave his power to Genovese. Costello was raised in the Calabria region, Italy. His father moved to the United States of America, and he opened a small grocery shop in New York. Later in 1895, his brother and mother came to the US with him. Costello was just a 13-year-old boy when his brother introduced him to gang activities. At 13, Costello became a local gang member and was involved in gang activities. He used the name Frankie back then. Costello committed petty crimes like assault and robbery and went to jail in 1908, 1912, and 1917. In 1918, he married his sister's close friend, Loretta Gierman. He served 10 months in prison for carrying a concealed weapon in the same year. He was working for the Morello gang when he met Charlie Luciano. He was the leader of the Lower East Side gang of Manhattan. They both became friends and partners. Some of the elder members of the Luciano family were old school. They refused to work with anyone who was not Italian and disapproved of the partnership of Charlie and Costello. They did not trust non-Sicilians with work. They called Costello the Dirty Calabrian. Costello had many allies. To no one's surprise, most of them were Italians. He was also an ally of Irish and Jewish criminals. He got American citizenship in 1925. In 1936, Luciano was sentenced to 50 years in state prison for running a prostitute ring. It was too difficult to rule the crime family from prison. Genovese became the acting boss of the Luciano crime family. He fled to Italy to avoid prosecution for murder. Costello was then appointed as acting boss by Luciano. When Costello retired, he was known as the Prime Minister of the Underworld. He still had the power in New York Mafia and was busy during his last days. Then, in 1973, he had a heart attack and died in Manhattan. Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar was the sole leader of the Medellin cartel. This cartel monopolized drug smuggling in the United States of America from the 1980s to early 1990s. The Medellin cartel was founded in 1976 by Pablo himself. It monopolized the distribution of powder cocaine by establishing smuggling routes from Colombia to Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and the United States. A huge demand for cocaine was created in the 1980s. Pablo shipped 70 to 80 tons of cocaine from Colombia to the United States. This made him the richest criminal in history. He was always at war with rival groups in both the US and in Colombia. Hundreds of people were killed, including police officers, politicians, and even judges. This made Colombia the murder capital of the world. Pablo began his crime journey in high school. He started by making fake high school diplomas, and it escalated rather quickly from there. He indulged in illegal drug supply, selling fake lottery tickets, vehicle theft, and many more such activities after dropping after college. He later became involved in drug smuggling, kidnapping, and holding people for a huge amount. Pablo married when he was 26 years old to Matia Victoria Henao. She was 15 years old when they married Escobar in 1976. Henao's family did not favor marriage because they considered Pablo socially inferior. But the pair eloped and had 2 children, Juan Pablo and Manuela. Pablo was involved in many romantic relationships, journalists, models, and it's said that prostitutes frequently visited his self-built prison. Pablo also had high political dreams, shattered when the Colombian government arrested him with his links to the DAS building and Avancia flight bombings. Escobar was the last major boss of his cartel. After eluding the great nationwide, the intense manhunt for 7 years, he surrendered in exchange for a promise of leniency for a drug-related crime and a guarantee against extradition to the United States. He was then escorted to the prison he built for himself in a helicopter. Popeye, Otto, and Carlos Aguilar are the other 3 cartel members who surrendered with their boss. One day in the evening, Cesar Gaviria, the president of Colombia, announced the surrender and said that his treatment would not be any different from any other criminals. But of course, we all know how that went. After facing 8 cases in the United States of America, including one for the murder of police, Escobar was most wanted in both nations. He was also a major part of the killing of a news publisher and 2 presidents. John Gotti. John Joseph Gotti Jr. was the boss of the Gambino crime family. Born on October 27, 1940, he was among the most feared American gangsters. Gotti is a classic example of how poverty leads to crime. He grew up in poverty along with his brothers. However, he quickly became one of the highest earners in his family. The Gambino family operated in the neighborhood of Ozone Park in Queens. Each of us has to confront our fear. We have to face it at least once in our life. John Gotti had that moment of realization when the FBI arrested his gang members for selling drugs. Gotti feared that Costello might kill him and his brothers for drug dealing, so he organized the murder of Costello as the fear grew. Gotti was known for his outspoken personality and tough decisions. This made him popular. He was known as the Dapper Don because of his expensive clothes. In the 1980s, he fled 3 high-profile jury trials. The jury misconduct and witness intimidation later came to light. He was also called the Teflon Boss for clearing these trials. Gotti was recorded by the Bugs throughout the Ravenite when he was discussing incriminating events. The Bugs were concealed in the main room, hallway on the first floor, and building apartment. FBI agents raided the Ravenite and arrested Gotti, Gravano, and Locasio. Gotti was charged with a racketeering case, 5 murders, and conspiracy to murder Cateo Vistola, gambling, and tax evasion. He was diagnosed with throat cancer in 1998. His condition declined rapidly, and he died in 2002 at the age of 61. Meyer Lansky. Meyer Lansky is known as Mob's accountant. He was an organized crime figure in America who was a key element in the development of the National Crime Syndicate in the United States of America. He was a member of the Jewish mob. Lansky was the mastermind that developed a gambling empire that expanded worldwide. He was said to own certain percentages or points in casinos located in Cuba, Las Vegas, the Bahamas, and London. He had a strong influence on the Italian-American Mafia. He played a big role in the consolidation of the criminal world. He denied many accusations against him, so his involvement is debatable. Lansky was active in the organized crime for nearly 50 years. The surprising thing about this career was that he was never found guilty. Yeah, despite the 50 years of active participation, he was never found guilty of any serious crimes. His most serious offense was illegal gambling. He left the legacy of being one of the most financially successful gangsters in American history. His net worth was said to be worth $20 million before he fled to Cuba. He was worth $159 million when he died in 1983. His estate alone was worth $57,000. Lansky attended a secret meeting in 1946 to discuss Sengel's management of the Flamingo Hotel in Havana. The hotel was running behind schedule, costing them a lot of money. Other bosses wanted to kill the Segel, but Lansky begged them to give him another chance. Lansky and Segel's friendship was the reason behind it. A secret meeting was called when Lansky continued to lose money on the hotel. By the time of the meeting, the casino had returned a small profit. Luciano supported Lansky, and they both convinced other investors to give him some more time. But the hotel continued to lose money. The investors decided to kill Segel. Lansky was compelled to say yes to killing Segel. Segel was shot dead in Beverly Hills, California in 1947. Lansky's associates took over the Flamingo 20 minutes after the death of Segel. Lansky retained a huge financial interest in Flamingo for the next 20 years. It's believed that Lansky had the compromising pictures of former FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover with Clyde Tolson, his longtime aide. Anthony Summers, the author of the book Official and Confidential, The Secret Life to J. Edgar Hoover, cites many sources which say about Lansky's use of blackmail to gain influence among politicians and judges. It's hard to explain why Lansky was not convicted, because the FBI files on Lansky revealed extensive monitoring and investigation. He might have successfully evaded it by blackmail. Lansky retired in Miami. He spent his last year in his home. It was near Miami Beach in Florida. He died at the age of 80 because of lung cancer. He left his wife and his 3 children. Lansky's worth on paper was absolutely nothing. It's widely believed that he left over $300 million in hidden bank accounts. The FBI never found any of the money. Al Capone. Al Capone's full name was Alphonse Gabriel Capone. He was born on January 17, 1899. He was the co-founder and the boss of the Chicago outfit. Unfortunately, his reign as a crime boss was rather short. He went to prison at the age of 33. His nickname was Scarface. The American gangster was born to an Italian immigrant in 1899 in New York. As a teenager, he joined the 5 Points gang and became a bouncer in brothels. He moved to Chicago in his early 20s and became the bodyguard for the head of a criminal syndicate, Johnny Torrio. A conflict with Northside Gang plays an important role in the rise and fall of Capone. Torrio was almost killed by the Northside's gang gunmen. He retired and gave power to Capone. He extended the intensity of violence in the bootlegging business. He was safe from law enforcement because he had a mutually profitable relationship with the mayor, William Hale, and the city police. He got cheers from the spectators when he appeared at ball games. He donated to charities, some even calling him the modern-day Robin Hood. All of this to stay in attention. His public image in Chicago was damaged when 7 gang rivals were murdered in broad daylight in the San Valentine's Day Massacre. Newspapers called him public enemy number 1. The federal authorities were intent on sending Capone to prison, so they charged him with 22 counts of tax evasion. He was convicted of 5 of them in 1931. He was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. Later, he replaced his defense team and hired experts in tax law. Finally, he strengthened his grounds of appeal in the Supreme Court, which failed. He died of a stroke and cardiac arrest on January 25, 1947. Jesse James. Born on September 5, 1847, Jesse James was one of the most feared gangsters in America. He was famous as a bank and train robber. Leader of the James Younger Gang, he was raised in Little Dixie area of Missouri. James's family maintained strong Southern sympathies. He joined bushwhackers and pro-Confederate guerrillas with his brother Frank James. Bushwhackers were operating in Missouri and Kansas during the American Civil War. He was a follower of William Quantrill and Bloody Bill Anderson. Both were accused of committing atrocities against the Union soldiers. James is portrayed as Robin Hood, who robs the rich and gives it to the poor. This is just a conspiracy, and so far, no evidence of them sharing the loot is available. He's one of the most famous people in that era, whose story was dramatized due to the lack of data availability. Historians consider James one of the criminals, not the alleged Robin Hood stories. Missouri was a border state with 75% of the population from the South. It shared characteristics of both North and South. Therefore, this country was strongly influenced by Southern culture. Farmers started raising the same crop from the area they migrated. The country accounted for more slaves than any other region. The culture was Southern in other ways apart from slavery. This influenced how the population acted after the war. The same applies to James's family. Frank James eluded the capture and joined the guerrilla organization. It was led by William C. Quantrill and was known as Quantrill's Raiders. He was also part of the massacre of 200 men in Lawrence, Kansas. It was the center for abolitionists. Frank went to Texas with Quantrill in the winter of 1863. He returned to the squad commanded by Fletch Taylor in the spring. 16-year-old boy James joined his brother's group. Taylor was severely injured in 1864 and he lost his right arm. The James brothers then joined the Bushwhackers. Jesse suffered a serious chest injury. Both Frank and James took part in the Centrilla massacre in September. Guerrillas stopped the train carrying the Union soldiers returning home from duty and killed and wounded some of them. The guerrillas dismembered some of the dead bodies. Long story short, Jesse was involved in several gangs and his own. But like any other gang, it had its peak and it saw his downfall. In Minnesota, the James Younger Gang attempted to rob the First National Bank of Minnesota. This robbery, attempted on September 7, 1876, went wrong quickly. All the members of the gang were killed, apart from James and Frank. This bank was selected because it was said to be associated with the Republican politician Albert Ames and Union General Benjamin Butler. Albert was a stockholder, but Butler had no connection with the bank. The gang was divided into 2 groups to rob the bank. They tried to rob the bank at 2 p.m. 2 men guarded the door. 3 entered the bank and 3 remained on the bridge. Everything went wrong when the cashier, Joseph Lee Haywood, refused to open the safe and falsely claimed that it was secured by a time lock. He refused to open the safe even when they pointed knives at his throat and cracked his skull. The assistant cashier was wounded as he fled through the back door. The citizens grew suspicious of the men guarding the door and raised the alarm. The bandits outside fired into the air, which led townspeople to take cover and fire back from protected positions. The outlaws turned to flee. One of them shot the cashier in the head. James's gang was mostly wiped out. He trusted only the Ford brothers, Charlie and Robert. James's gang asked the Ford brothers to move in with him and his family for protection. Bob Ford had conducted secret negotiations with the Missouri Governor Thomas T. C. to bring Jesse James. The governor's top priority was to capture the James brothers. He declared that no political motives could be allowed to keep them from justice. James realized that the Ford brothers were there to betray him when he saw the newspaper that said that Dick Lidley had confessed about participating in Wood Hit's murder, and it was not informed to him. James laid a revolver on the sofa. He then noticed the picture on the wall was dusty and stood on a chair to clean it. Robert Ford shot the unarmed Jesse in the head. So, these were the most feared gangsters and their stories. Hit the like button and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think about these gangsters. See you in the next video.